Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Collar here with you, along with Manny Hill. And I got to tell you, Manny, I was prepping for the show earlier today after I got back from TCO Performance Center. And I'm going through like, hey, let's talk about, Josh Dobbs, of course, and let's try to do some fun stuff. And hey, this Jordan Hicks injury, we might want to dive into that. And then I, look down at my phone and I'm like, wait a minute, is someone trolling me? Is someone messing around, playing a joke? Is this a fake Adam Schefter that says Anthony Barr is returning to the Minnesota Vikings? Because that can't be true, right? Like Anthony Barr coming back, but it's true because Jordan Hicks is injured, and it sounds like it was potentially very, very serious with his leg injury, and that just because the training staff was on it and they were able to get him to the hospital, he is going to be able to recover. But from the medical professionals who have tweeted me today, it sounds like this injury is kind of a multi-week type of thing. So the Vikings go out. They get the best available free agent, which just so happens to be, I'm going to call him borderline Viking legend. They like to use it for anybody who played for the Vikings when they come back, all the legends and everything. Multi-time Pro Bowler, first-round draft pick, one of the centerpieces of one of the best Vikings defenses in team history in 2017, Anthony Barr. Welcome back, buddy. There's a couple people you recognize. Your reaction, Manny?
Bust out your old number 55 jerseys, man. Get those things out. Remember when Randy Moss came back in 2010? He said, "Break out your old 84 jerseys" at his press conference. Yeah, wow, that came out of left field. I mean, I remember when Jordan Hicks got injured in the game. It looked like I didn't really think anything of it because it looked like he was able to continue for a little bit. He stayed in for a couple of plays, and I think he ultimately came out of the game. So, I mean, that part of it is just kind of surprising that it seems like this is going to be a little bit more of a serious thing for Jordan Hicks. But I guess the question for Anthony Barr now is just, how much does he have left? He hasn't played. He hasn't been on a team this year, hasn't played in a while. Kind of bounced around the league a little bit since he left the Vikings. So the question now is, at this point of his career, at this age, I think he's 31 now. What can he bring to the table? How will he be used? It's a different defensive scheme than what it was under Mike Zimmer. So you wonder if he'll be used differently under Brian Flores, and just how much, how long is it going to take for him to kind of get ramped up, get back into game shape, and ready to get on the field to contribute. Because obviously, if they brought him in, they're going to need him at some point to maybe contribute. So interesting, though, surprising. That's one way to put it. I did not see this coming at all.
The first thing is it's probably a sign that Hicks is going to be out for a little while and could go to injured reserve. And I think that Kevin O'Connell was trying to be optimistic about his outlook, but probably as the day went along, they got more updates on how Jordan Hicks was doing in his recovery and more conversations with doctors, and probably came to the conclusion, yeah, we better sign somebody, because you have Ivan Pace Jr., who called the defense in preseason, but that was pretty much it. And you have Troy Dye. I mean, there's not a lot of depth when it comes to this linebacker group. Brian Asamoah is hurt as well. I mean, this is like they are kind of bleeding players all over the place here. KJ Osborne goes down. Madison goes down. They have to bring in Myles Gaskin. I mean, of course, the quarterback. They've had all sorts of this rash of injuries going on, but this one seemed like at first maybe it wouldn't be too bad. And then now with Anthony Barr arriving, probably will keep Hicks out for a while. As far as what he brings to the table still, one of the biggest things, and I'll tell you what PFF had him for last year when he was within Dallas, intelligence is the biggest thing. Anthony Barr is one of the smartest football players that I've been around. He knows the game inside and out. And I always believed Mike Zimmer when he would talk about Anthony Barr and the hidden value of Anthony Barr. And Zimmer explained it to us. He laid it out like X's and O's. This is why, just a PFF grade does not capture everything this guy does. Anthony Barr was brilliant with the green dot, which is when you have the headset and you're calling the plays defensively. And one of the things that linebackers do is they play these games with checks with the quarterback. So the opposing quarterback, he's going to see a defense and he's going to make a check. All right, we're checking to a run or we're checking to a different pass play. And then Anthony Barr would try to read what they were doing and he would check out of a blitz, into a blitz. He would read how they shifted protections and make checks. This guy was a massive part of the success. And look at how those defenses did over the years. He made the Pro Bowl. He was a player that people needed to account for. I think that he was underappreciated because he got a big contract that they shouldn't have given out. And then we know what happens. The minute you pay somebody, it's like, if you are not like the best player in the world, then everyone's going to come down hard on you. But I think that that's the biggest part here, Manny, is they don't have anybody with real experience. I mean, Nick Vigil, I don't know if he's called the defense before. They don't have anybody with experience where they are doing that stuff that Jordan Hicks was doing, reading offenses, making checks, getting the calls out. And somebody told me about Anthony Barr that one of the things that was great was how even-keeled he was, where no matter how loud the stadium was, no matter what the situation was, he was so great at being the even hand of the defense for all those years. And they finished top 5 in either points or yards, like every year for a long run with Anthony Barr. So even if he does not have the same physical skill, I think that he could come in here, learn what Brian Flores is doing pretty quickly, and be that guy who is operating the defense in place of Jordan Hicks.
Stability, right? I mean, that's kind of what you need. And that kind of represents what Jordan Hicks is as a player, as a linebacker in this defense too, is just a guy who's been in the league for a number of years now, knows what he's doing out there, knows how to make all of the calls and keep everybody and put everybody where they're supposed to be on the field. And if Anthony Barr has the experience doing that, albeit a different scheme under Mike Zimmer, that's going to help. And he's familiar with the organization. Obviously, there's still, many guys on this team that were his teammate before during his first stint here. So I think that's going to help matters as well. I don't see any downside to it at all. I mean, it just seems to make the most sense. He was in the league last year with the Dallas Cowboys, so it's not like he's being pulled completely off of the street. So it'll be interesting to see just how much, how long it takes him to sort of get a grasp of the scheme with Brian Flores, because it is a different scheme. And I would imagine it'll go pretty well. It'll be pretty seamless. And he'll step in and he'll start making some plays early on.
So last year, he graded a 59.7 for Dallas. And in 2021, it was a 62.9 for the Minnesota Vikings. And like those numbers are very much average. But the thing is that average trying to sign a guy on November 13th is about the best you could ever do. Yep. And I don't think, I mean, we'll see like how much of a role you're asking him to take. My guess is that he won't play this week and then next week, and then you got a bye week. And then after that, if he's got to be that guy for the rest of the season, that he would be able to play quite a bit. And as you said, learn that defense and make it a seamless transition because of his football intelligence. And that's what, this front office, this coaching staff has really focused on, is high IQ guys. But the thing is, that always comes up with Anthony Barr that I tried to kind of work through when he was a Viking that still seems to exist is this right here from Todd. Brian Flores will use him as an off-ball pass rusher, unlike Zimmer. Here's the thing. Anthony Barr blitzed as much as any linebacker in the NFL. I have the data right up in front of me. He was blitzing a huge percentage of his snaps, over 100 pass rushes every single year from 2014 to 2019, except for 2017, it was 99. He was racking up 20 pressures a year. Like for that role, that is one of the most blitz heavy. But the thing is that they would try to put him at an edge rusher position at times in practice. and during training camp and things like that, that really wasn't what he was great at. I mean, he could do it, but in comparison to wearing the green dot and operating the entire defense and being the leader of that defense and being able to shut down running backs out of the backfield, I mean, remember how many swing passes, screen passes, stretch runs did we see him tracking people down? He was incredibly valuable. I have a really hard time believing that Mike Zimmer misused anybody on defense. I mean, they were a prolific defensive team for his years where he was there. And were they supposed to take Everson Griffin off the field to do this? Like, I never understood. I really never understood that take. Could they have rushed him more? Probably, but I mean, they were still doing it among the highest in the league. That being said, if there's a guy who's a fit, potentially, and last year he played 600 snaps. So like you said, Manny, it's not like he just hadn't played in years and is just showing up here. That being said, there might be a fit for him for a guy that does have a ton of experience rushing the passer, knowing that that's really what Brian Flores likes to do.
I think so much, and I think early on in the early years of Anthony Barr, 2014, 15, 16, I was a little guilty of this too. I think a lot of people were guilty of this. I think sometimes when you look at a player's body type, you just kind of assume, well, he's built like this. He's this tall and he weighs this much. So it makes sense to have him do this. So when you look at Anthony Barr, he's 6'5", he's 255 pounds. So he has like the body of like a 3-4 edge rusher, a blitzing outside linebacker, like how they're kind of using Danielle Hunter and DJ Wanham and Marcus Davenport when he's on the field, et cetera, et cetera. But to your point, he's never really been that. Mike Zimmer never used him that way. First of all, Mike Zimmer wasn't running a 3-4 scheme when he was the head coach here. He did a little bit as the defensive coordinator in Dallas, but when he became the head coach of the Vikings, they weren't running a 3-4, so they weren't using Anthony Barr in that way. And he was being used, as that green dot guy calling signals, and he was great against the run, and he was very disruptive at that second level spot where he was. So I think sometimes we get so, as fans and observers, we get so caught up in like, well, he looks like this, so he should be able to do it, this way. And so now we're kind of thinking, well, Brian Flores runs a 3-4, Anthony Barr is built this way, and just throw him in as a pass rushing outside linebacker in a 3-4. It makes perfect sense. But he's never really done that. He's never really been that type of guy. I think it makes more sense to just use him the way that he's always been used, because that's where he's been at his best. It makes the most sense to do it that way.
And it's a little bit of a complicated issue because it seemed to linger over his entire time here. Like, why isn't he rushing the passer more? Why isn't he rushing the passer more? And, there were times where, like in 2018, Everson Griffin missed some time in the middle of that season. And I think they did dial it up at that point. And Anthony Barr would play into it as well. He was very successful in rushing the passer because he was a really good blitzer. And imagine you're a running back and you're like 195 pounds, and here comes 6'5" and 260 pounds coming at you at a 4.6. Like, whoa. I mean, that was really not easy to take on. And so he had very high pressure rates, a very high success rate. A good part of that was also, I think, his decision making of when to do it, that he had freedom of when to do it or when to call, for the double A gap and when they were going to go for it and when they were going to drop back and stuff like that. So I think there was probably opportunity for them to do it more because his numbers were successful and he didn't have the splash plays that I think people saw very early in his career. But then when he would get asked about it, he would say, yeah, I want to blitz more. I think I'm a good pass rusher and so forth. So then it would kind of gain momentum. And so maybe there was more opportunity. But as far as like, is Flores going to make him a pure pass rusher? No, he's not. I mean, they want him to be an all-around linebacker to take the place of Jordan Hicks here, presumably. And look, I mean, you couldn't ask for much more from Ivan Pace, but I wouldn't want a rookie to handle the rest of this season by himself. And then you're also looking at, Troy Dye, Nick Vigil behind him. I mean, it's just not a whole lot there in terms of depth. So this to me is another instance of this is about the best you can do. The same with them going to get Josh Dobbs in the middle of the season. Like, it's hard to do better than this, hard to do better than what they got from Cam Akers going out and making a trade. So they are sensing, I think, like, hey, we can be in the playoffs and we got to start like replacing these guys with other players who might be able to make a difference. So very interesting reunion for Anthony Barr, and I will be very much intrigued by how he fits into a different defense. But I think, Manny, we've gotten to a point where we're just like trusting Brian Flores with whatever he's doing, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's the way I've gotten to is almost everybody that Flores gets his hands on seems to be consistently improving. Even if you look at the numbers from the Saints game, Caleb Evans is playing well. Andrew Booth Jr. Hey, 2022 draft class. You got two corners who have been playing quite a bit and a guard who's shown improvement. I guess we shouldn't judge a draft class after 1 year. I don't know, but we'll see how that all plays out. But it just is like to gotten to the point where certain coaches, you're like, I think that guy will figure it out, even though I shouldn't think that Anthony Barr will come in here and make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, we saw just from the way that Mike Zimmer used Anthony Barr that he's capable of doing more than I think what our as observers what our initial idea of him was. And I think when you put him in a situation with Brian Flores, who has really taken on a situation where you had a lot of veterans on this team on the defensive side that were gone when Brian Flores arrived, and he's kind of come in and he's made the best out of the group that he has, and he's really had a lot of guys show improvement. You know, a lot of the younger players are showing that they're developing really well. You mentioned the young corners and how well they're playing, and he seems to be getting the most out of. I mean, Danielle Hunter has been fantastic. I mean, we know how good he is, and you know, Brian Flores just seems to be getting just even more out of Danielle Hunter. And DJ Wanham has shown a lot of improvement. You know, I had some question marks about, you know, is he going to be able to kind of step into a bigger role in this defense? And with Davenport being out, DJ Wanham has really stepped up and been a really solid player for the defense. And, you know, I think it's the safeties have been great. So I think I don't see anything wrong with just adding a guy like Anthony Barr, a veteran player, knows what he's doing, can be used in a lot of different kinds of ways, not just strictly as a pass rusher. He can do a lot of other things as he's shown in the past. I think this makes a lot of sense, and I think it's going to work. I think it's going to go pretty well, and you know, I think we're going to see this defense kind of continue to play as well as they have, especially the last couple of weeks.
All right, so you and I both made fun lists based on Anthony Barr returning. You've made a list of, I said, anyone from the Vikings that you could bring back and put on this team to make them a Super Bowl contender, except Favre, because that's not fair. That like, okay, all-time great quarterback. Tarkenton doesn't count either. So you can't bring back two of the great quarterbacks, but anybody else, who will you put on this Vikings team to make them a Super Bowl contender? I made the list of 2017 players to bring back and put on this team, and we will get to those in just a moment. But first, want to remind you guys about Prize Picks. We've been having a lot of fun on the show all season long on Prize Picks. It is very simple. All you do with Prize Picks is go to their website, prizepicks.com, and you pick more or less between 2 and 6 stat of player projections. So you have more yards for Josh Dobbs than 215, say, and then, or you pick less yards. It's very simple for a number of players. And then you're going. That's all you need to do. And we've been crushing it actually so far this year. And there's lots of different categories. There's receiving, there's rushing, there's field goals, and it's been a lot of fun to play. prizepicks.com/purple. Use the code purple for a first deposit match up to $100. And one of the reasons that I like it is that you don't have to take out a second mortgage to play. You could turn $10 into $250 with just a couple of taps or a couple of clicks. So prizepicks.com/purple. With the code purple, daily fantasy sports made easy. I'm hoping when we make our picks this Thursday that they've got a Josh Dobbs rushing more or less, so I can make a pick for over for that. All right. So what do you want to go back? Let's go back and forth. We'll go back and forth. You got 5. any player who would make the Vikings a Super Bowl contender. And I got 5 2017 players in the comments. Would love to see your nominations as well. So where do you want to start in honor of Anthony Barr returning? Which former Vikings would make this team a Super Bowl contender?
Okay, so we're going to do one at a time and go back and forth, right? Is that what we're going to do?
We'll go back and forth. Yeah, you pick one, I pick one. My list is 2017. You get all Vikings.
Okay, so I'm going to go my number 5 guy. I'm going to go Kevin Williams. Let's put Kevin Williams on this defensive front. Probably be kind of more, he was kind of more of like a 3 technique guy, but he was also really good against the run, but also a very good pass rusher as well. And I think you and I would both agree, if they're, this defense is playing great right now, but I think if you could add another element, it's a guy who can, be really, really good against the run and also be able to rush the passer as well. So Kevin Williams is a guy that I would take who was really good at both of those elements. So I'd put him right on that defensive front.
At some point, Kevin Williams, I think, will end up in the Hall of Fame. There are very few players historically who have 6 All-Pros that are not in the Hall of Fame. So, very, very good chance that he ends up, one of the great defensive tackles in NFL history. I am going to go with a right guard. And even though there has been improvement for sure with Ed Ingram, I will replace him with one Joe Berger, who graded over an 80 in 2017 at the right guard position. Absolutely terrific. A journeyman offensive lineman who came into his own later in his career and was very, very good for the Vikings. He beat out John Sullivan in a training camp and then had to move to guard, and he was excellent. This offensive line with a right guard would just be one of the best, if not the best line in the entire NFL. I think they've already got a case for being up there, even with their one weak point. But Joe Berger, I will take the 2017 version, put him on this team.
Love it. Fantastic. Versatile guy, Joe Berger. You could really put him almost anywhere on the line. He was going to be a professional and step in and be just super, super reliable for you. Love that. I'll even go a step further, same position, but I'll go with left guard, the great, outstanding, one of the greatest, if not the greatest guard of all time, Randall McDaniel, baby. Put him right there at the left guard spot. No disrespect to Dalton Reisner. Dalton Reisner's been fine, but you put in a guy like Randall McDaniel on this offensive line, and it's left tackle. Why am I having a brain fart right now? A great left tackle. Christian Darrisaw. Yeah, my brain's all over the place. But you put Christian Darrisaw, an all-pro caliber left tackle, right next to one of the greatest guards in the history of the league. That is an outstanding left side of your offensive line. Give me Randall McDaniel at guard.
One of the great players. And by the way, you could put him in the backfield. That would be look, you definitely go back a while if you know the reference, but if you go back and watch old Vikings games on YouTube, you will occasionally see Randall McDaniel lining up at fullback, and it is the craziest thing because he's as athletic as most regular fullbacks. It's wild. From the 2017 team, if they could reach back in time and bring one of those players here, I would select for my number 4 pick, Tom Johnson. One of the things that they do not do particularly well is get penetration from the interior. Tom Johnson was always criticized for not being a run stopper, but played 60% of the plays that year. And they had one of the top run defenses, if not number 1 in the NFL. Just a terrific, terrific story. Came from the CFL, fought his way up into a role with that defense. And if you mixed him with Jonathan Bullard, with Harrison Phillips, and got a guy who can actually get upfield, Tom Johnson would be a tremendous fit for this team. Also, one of my favorite guys ever to cover super, super football IQ, super intense guy as well. Really, really appreciated Tom Johnson. So that is my number 4 pick.
I love that. Tom Johnson was he was like a godsend, man, because they had Sharif Floyd in that spot, and Sharif had the injuries and everything and just wasn't available. And for Tom Johnson to kind of step into that role and be really, really stout, really solid in that position, that was a low-key game changer for that defense in 2017. Love that. All right. I am going to stay on the offensive side for my next selection. And I had a little trouble with this. I kind of decided, okay, do I want to go with the guy that everybody's going to think of at this position, or do I want to go in a different direction? So obviously everybody's going to think about Adrian Peterson, at running back to bolster the running game. You can't go wrong with that pick, I don't think, at all. One of the great running backs of all time. But I'm going to go Robert Smith. I'm going to go my guy, Robert Smith, at running back to bolster that line. He was a home run threat every time he touched the ball. Obviously, we know Adrian was too. But Robert Smith just had a way of just hitting that hole right away. Didn't do a lot of dancing in the backfield, kind of like what Adrian had the tendency to do. Robert Smith would hit that hole and he would go. And if he had a hole wide enough, he hit that hole right away, and it was touchdown, baby. It was gone every single time. Robert Smith, outstanding. Put him in that backfield to bolster that running game.
I respect this in part because with Adrian Peterson, now look, I mean, no one questions that Peterson is one of the greatest running backs of all time. You name the top 10, he's got to be in there. But there was that element of home run or nothing that I think what the Vikings are looking for is just a little more consistency with that because they want to pass the ball all the time. I mean, like I would take Adrian over Robert Smith. I think most people would, but catching out of the backfield, also Robert Smith, pretty darn good at it. Pass protection, another very high IQ player. Like I like that fit, and I would probably still pick AP, but like I like the fit. I like what you're going for, that you went a little off the beaten trail here. Now, since I used two of my picks on guys that were more of role players from the 2017 team, there's going to be some other players who are left off. So I apologize to them that they are deserving. They are left off, but I'm not going to leave off all the greats. Everson Griffin. If you put him back, if you take that version who got a sack, I think in every one of the first like 8 or 9 games, that lightning bolt version of Everson Griffin with this defense, with Danielle Hunter on the other side, and the way that they mess with people coverage wise. Yeah, I like what DJ Wanham's done. The couple of games Mark Davenport was in, it looks like there's a chance he could come back. But it is, even with Wanham improving, it is the one thing that is kind of missing is when you just rush 4, it's pretty much Danielle Hunter still. And if Wanham makes an impact, that's good. But it's mostly Danielle Hunter. So I will put Everson Griffin there, and this team is going to be super dangerous at that point if he is there.
And think about how much of just like an emotional leader Everson Griffin was for that 2017 defense. I mean, he was kind of the heart and soul of that unit. He had so many great players at every level of that group, but he was kind of like the face of that defense, so to speak. So yeah, I love that. Would be a great fit in Brian Flores' defense. All right, my next pick. And you're going to love this too, because this is your guy. This is both of our guy, Antoine Winfield, baby. Put Antoine Winfield in this secondary as a nickel corner. Just awesome cover guy. Great in the running game. Was a sure tackler as you could find out of that position. And just a guy that just knew football. Just football IQ was fantastic. And another guy that was just a consummate professional, just great leader of a defense. Give me Antoine Winfield in that secondary. Be fantastic.
One of the all-time greatest tacklers in history, pound for pound. And I don't know if I've ever really told this story on the show. Maybe I have, because people will ask me about growing up in Buffalo and like, hey, who are, your favorite Bills players, or do you still root for the Bills? And so here's the thing, as they're playing right now and not playing very well, by the way, maybe Denver's going to be a little scarier than we thought. I don't know. They're playing pretty good. But so I grew up and watched nothing but the Buffalo Bills every single Sunday. And Antoine Winfield became one of my favorite players. And when they let him leave, I was done with the Bills. I was like, I'm done. I'm going to root for Cleveland. That I remember, like I bought a Tim Couch jersey got one for my parents for Christmas. I went and got like Cleveland Browns football cards. I'm like, I'm done. I was so mad because the Bills were cheap at the time. The NFL hadn't exploded the same way it is now, where the franchise are worth $5 billion. I was so upset that they let Antoine Winfield go, that I was done. I was like, this franchise is not serious and I'm out. And it never recovered, because then they missed the playoffs like every year after that for like 17 or 18 straight years or whatever it was. So it never recovered. And that was when I was, I don't know, like 13 or something, but it never was the same. So it was kind of like when I was a little kid, yes, and the rest, I don't know. I just watched the whole league and played Madden with other teams. That's how upset I was. And he came here and became a Viking legend. And then his kid became a Gopher legend and should have become a Viking legend. So, just not talk about that draft other than
Yeah.
Justin Jefferson. But okay, so back to my list. This is where it gets pretty hard. But the one thing that this team is missing is a shutdown corner, lockdown. If Xavier Rhodes was on one side and the roads were not open, let me tell you, Manny, this defense would be something, because if there's one part that I still wonder about, and we saw it a little bit the other day, Byron Murphy isn't really like making plays on the ball. There was a couple, I mean, some were just insane throws, but he's had, I would say, an up and down season. Caleb Evans has been a nice addition. These guys are not shutting down Julio Jones, Mike Evans, Antonio Brown. He was just on one that season. And for probably like 3 years, 2.5 years, he was a premier shutdown corner in the entire NFL. And as far as I know, I'm one of the last guys who would follow the number one wide receiver. I feel like offenses switched a little bit to do all these motions and different splits and stuff that made that harder. But he would follow that number one guy every single week. Man, if they had that, this would be one heck of a defense. I would trust them against pretty much anybody. So he is my number 2 pick, Xavier Rhodes.
Yeah, love it. I mean, from 2015 till 2018, maybe, or 2015 till, I think, something happened with Xavier Rhodes, I think, in the Miracle game where he landed awkwardly and I think he was kind of hurt the second half of that game or something like that. I don't want to speculate too much, but it feels like after the Miracle game, Xavier wasn't quite the same guy. He was still pretty good for a couple more years, but he just wasn't quite the same like elite shutdown guy he was in 2015, 16, and 17. I mean, he was just amazing. You threw it in his direction and it just wasn't happening. Like, whoever he had, whoever his assignment was, just was not going to get the football. He was that good, man. You put him on this defense, it would be great. Okay, my number one guy, and I think this guy could play on any defense and just be an absolute disruptor on the defensive front. John Randall, man. John Randall, you could put him anywhere on that defensive front, just as a pass rusher, as an interior defensive lineman, and just an elite level pass rusher. You put him on this defense, and that would help tremendously. And he's a guy that I think is light enough that you could maybe stand him up and have him be kind of an edge rusher in this kind of unit as well. He was that versatile. He was that quick, that fast. Just one of the all-time great defensive players in the history of the league. And another one of those guys that was just a great emotional locker room guy too, to really kind of elevate the play of guys around him as well, much like what Everson Griffin was for that 2017 team. So give me John Randall on this unit too. Would love it.
No question about it. I mean, you move him around just like a little later in his career when he was coming off the edge as well as moving inside. But that's exactly what Brian Flores likes to do. And I mean, I'm envisioning him standing up over a guard on a pass rushing situation and the guard being terrified because of his get off, his quickness, his violence. It would have been such a great fit for this defense. Not that John Randall doesn't fit every single defense in history. Truly one of the greatest players to ever step on a football field. And the energy that man brings, I think would really fit with Brian Flores with this defense. If you have John Randall, you are going over the top. And again, just to restate the rules, obviously I said like not quarterbacks because it's so clear, like, yeah, Dante in his prime or something like that was so clear. So that was just to clarify on the list. Now, 2017, I debated between a couple of different players because I've used some of the role players. I've used some of the best players. I considered Jarius Wright. That was my joke on Twitter. Like, if Jarius Wright shows up, they're going to the NFC Championship game. And so people are tagging Jarius Wright. Like, what are you up to, man? Like, are you going to show up here? And I'll tell you another player I consider. because my trust for Greg Joseph is not very high. Kai Forbath, I considered. I was like, wait, can I fit Kai Forbath in this list? Because after Joseph missed again the other day, I was like, man, I just don't feel the belief when he trots out into the field, and I don't know if he does either. He just pushes a lot of kicks wide to the right, and if you look at his last couple of years in the NFL, is not one of the higher field goal percentages in the league. So I don't have a lot of trust for him. Kai Forbath will always be forgotten for making a 52-yard field goal to take the lead late in that game in the Minneapolis Miracle game. That's as clutch as it gets. So, look, I thought about it, but I thought I can't avoid one of the receivers because we could create an all-time 3 deep here. And everybody knows he's been on the show. I have so much respect for Adam Thielen, but I'm going to pick Stephon Diggs. Minneapolis Miracle Man, unguardable. We have seen this in Buffalo since he went there. Can you imagine? And I remember when we used to talk about this, like, hey, if you hadn't manipulated Stephon Diggs, you could have just drafted Justin Jefferson anyway, and then had Jefferson and Diggs. And imagine how that would have gone. Well, that's what we're doing in Imagination Land. We're bringing back Stephon Diggs, and it's going to be Jefferson, Diggs, and Jordan Addison. And I do have to say, I mean, and that would truly be the 3 deep. When people are tweeting out, and again, respect KJ Osborne, like him, but when people are tweeting out, hey, this is 3 deep, like Addison, Jefferson, and KJ Osborne, the disrespect for Jake Reed was just too intense for me. Yeah. Like, it was stop. Jake Reed is a 1,000-yard receiver like 4 years in a row. Cut it out. But that would be a true 3 deep if they were able to bring it in. And I won't even worry about who's a running back, because I also thought about, like, Delvin doesn't really count because he tore his ACL early in that season. Jarek would be great for this. A great pass protector, good in the passing game, but obviously Diggs is too good for this. So if I were pulling players off the 2017 team, he would round out my top 5. So that's fun, Manny. That's a fun list. But instead, it's Anthony Barr at age 31, and I guess we'll find out what he's going to bring. Now, in a second, because I have another read, I want to talk about where we rank the Vikings in the NFC, because I actually think this is a very interesting discussion now as I look at the rest of the NFC, and we're seeing a clear just divide right down the middle of the NFC. But where we think the Vikings belong in that category is a debate to be had. So first, I want to tell you all, and now things just got real interesting, and I got some notes about people buying their tickets to go to Las Vegas. That's where I'm going to be when Minnesota travels to Las Vegas in the second week of December. I will be there at Circa in Las Vegas. And if you would like to come along and escape the Minnesota December weather like me, and also watch a team that has suddenly become very exciting, then you can meet me at Circa Las Vegas, where I will be hanging out, doing the podcast there for a couple days leading up to the game. And you'll be able to find me outside at Stadium Swim, which is amazing. Google it if you haven't seen it before. Watching games on their gigantic television. They've got heated pools out there. So if it's the cold weather of 70-something degrees, the pools are still heated. And it's just one of my favorite places on earth to go. Then on Friday night before the game, we've got a special party there for Minnesota fans that includes drink specials, 2 tickets to give away to the game. So you can meet me there at the Overhang Bar, which is inside Circa. You have to RSVP for the party. So go to their website there, go to where it says Huddle Up at Overhang, find it there, RSVP, and I will be there. So make a whole weekend of it at Circa, located on the amazing Fremont Street. Again, that's one of those things I could only attempt to describe to you if you haven't been there. Amazing to see. So we'll have a great getaway from the Minnesota weather and a lot of fun. And that game is going to have some juice now as well. So book your spot today, circalasvegas.com, and I will see you there. All right. So, Manny, what are we thinking about the strength of the NFC? I am very interested to hear how many teams on this day you would put ahead of the Minnesota Vikings on a list of NFC squadrons. What do you got?
Right now, I have the Vikings, and this might be a little bit surprising to some people, but they've been playing really good football, and they've won 5 games in a row, and they're in a really good spot right now. I have the Vikings as the 5th best team in the NFC right now. I've got the Eagles, Lions, 49ers, and Cowboys ahead of them. When I was looking over the rest of the conference, I was kind of debating over like Seattle. Seattle's 6-3, and they're tied with the 49ers for first place in the West. But Seattle is I'm not sure what to think of them yet. Their defense hasn't been quite as good this year. Geno Smith is still playing okay. They've been able to run the ball, pretty effectively still too with the guys that they have. But, they were not great against the Baltimore Ravens, 2 weeks ago. The Ravens really just kind of destroyed them. And now we just saw the Ravens, blow a double-digit lead to the Cleveland Browns yesterday and end up losing that game. So you kind of wonder how good Baltimore is. And Seattle did not perform well against the Ravens a couple of weeks ago. So that, for me, and considering how well the Vikings have played now with the winning streak of 5 in a row, I gave the Vikings the edge over Seattle for that 5th spot in the NFC. So I've got the Vikings firmly at number 5 in the NFC right now.
So the Seattle one is the hardest one to figure out. And with San Francisco, they had those injuries that you cannot ignore. They were missing 2 all-pro players who are like all-decade team level when they played the Vikings. Not to take away from how great the win was. I'm not. But when you're missing Deebo Samuel and Trent Williams in that game, like, okay, well, that evens the tide a little bit. And then they get them back and they blast a really good Jacksonville Jaguars team. I'm still putting respect on San Francisco as either the best or second best team. The hard thing is, how much do we actually respect? So Philadelphia is clearly number 1. So maybe San Francisco number 2. How much do we buy into Dallas? When they play bad teams, they win by 100. And when they play good teams, they seem to, step on their own feet sometimes. Dallas seems like kind of the same old Dallas. Even as good as Dak Prescott is playing, like their bar is really high. 6-3 is just okay for them. Seattle is only, hold on, I just had this. They're only 14th in points scored and 20th in points against. To me, that's just not great. Like that just screams they're a middling team. There's been some regression with Geno Smith this year, that even though he had a game-winning drive against Washington, which traded most of their pass rushers, he is not as prolific as he was in the first 9 games of last year. Kind of seems like he's certainly a starter, but is he like an MVP candidate or something? No. I mean, he's still a flawed starting quarterback. Not that Josh Dobbs isn't. And that's the hard thing here, Manny, is Are we overrating what we just saw in that win over the New Orleans Saints to say, okay, they're better than Seattle? Right. I'm not sure though. Like, I don't trust Seattle and I don't trust Geno to be great through the rest of the season, but it's a strong team overall. The Vikings have a better point differential, but they also don't have their starting quarterback again. And it feels like at any time, we could get a 4 interception game or something like that from Josh Dobbs. And then we'll walk out of that going, oh yeah, that's right. Josh Dobbs is wonderful, but also the same guy that when they traded for him, you were like, I don't know, maybe. And you love Josh Dobbs.
Yep.
So that's the thing that is so hard to figure out here, is just what they're going to look like going forward. But getting Jefferson back makes me think that they are better. What is your order between the top teams? Because Detroit being in the mix here is interesting as well. I think Detroit is clearly better than the Vikings, but what is your exact order of the NFC teams? Not just who is better than them, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, so I've got Philadelphia clear-cut number 1, I think, over everybody, even San Francisco. I got the Niners number 2 because I think, to your point, if they get healthy, get everybody back and healthy and get back into the groove, they showed it yesterday, beating a Jacksonville team that, speaking of Jacksonville, they better be careful because the Houston Texans are now right on their tail, and CJ Stroud is playing great, so they've got to be careful. But the 49ers going into Jacksonville and really kind of reestablishing themselves as they're healthy and getting back into their groove again. Brock Purdy looked really good yesterday. So I've got them number 2. And then I've got Detroit number 3. And, Detroit right now, if the playoffs are today, Detroit would be the number 2 seed record-wise ahead of San Francisco. But, Detroit, they've got all the goods, right? They've got the quarterback who's playing well. They can run the football pretty well. They've got a good offensive line. They've got some really nice pieces on defense. But like then they go into Baltimore like a couple of weeks ago and they just lay an egg, and you're just kind of like, like they're good, but is this going to be a situation where like they're the number 2 seed and like, you know, if somebody is the number 7 and they're playing really well and it's a favorable matchup, could they go in Detroit and go into, you know, Ford Field and win a game there in a postseason? Probably, because maybe the Lions just aren't, you know, for as talented as they are, they're maybe not quite ready to go on a deep run yet. They've got the goods to do it, but you just kind of wonder, like, you go into Baltimore and you just kind of lay an egg like that, like, and that could end up being the difference between them getting the number 1 seed or not, you know, record-wise. They're only a game behind the Eagles right now. So that's what kind of has me kind of questioning Detroit a little bit. But I mean, I still think they're good enough. They're going to win the division. I think they're better than what the Vikings have. And, you know, I think they're going to be kind of firmly in, you know, one of those top 3 spots. But so I got them at number 3. And then I've got Dallas number 4, mainly because, you know, they're so talented. They kind of just they do these things sometimes where you just have a head scratcher. You know, the loss to Arizona and Josh Dobbs, by the way, who was quarterbacking the Cardinals at that time, just kind of makes you wonder, like, well, what the hell happened there? You know, it's just kind of the typical, like you said, typical Cowboy stuff where they just have kind of a bad game against a bad team. And you're like, how did they lose that game? They're not supposed to lose that type of a game. But, you know, it's hard to really take any of the other teams, you know, outside of Philly, Detroit, San Francisco, and put them ahead of Dallas right now, even as well as the Vikings are playing right now. I can't put the Vikings ahead of the Cowboys in the NFC. And some of the other teams, you know, New Orleans and Washington and some of these other teams that are kind of hanging around the playoff spot, the playoff mix, I'm not going to put any of those teams ahead of Dallas either. So I've got the Cowboys kind of firmly in that number 4 spot.
The one I'm struggling with to try to decide is between San Francisco and Detroit, because I watched that Ravens game and it was atrocious for Detroit. I mean, usually if you are that strong, you don't get murdered, but also sometimes teams have that happen. Like it got away from them early. They never really recovered, but you watch what they did against the Chargers, and look, the Chargers defense is not special, but I mean, excuse me, that rarely happens. That for as much Dr. Pepper as I drink, you would think I would sneeze on the air more often. Excuse me. But did not lose my train of thought, though. So let me jump back in. What they did to be able to put up the points they did against the Chargers, to lead game-winning drives, to scheme up big plays, and to show their explosiveness as an offense, that makes them really dangerous. But San Francisco's defense really tightening up against Jacksonville and maybe getting some things together with Steve Wilks, because, you know, even the way they handled the Vikings game was a little suspect. So getting it together on defense, their defensive talent is just better than Detroit. And I think they could still score with just about anyone. So I have the same order as you. And I also think that even if the Vikings play well the second half of the season, we're probably still talking about needing some things to go insanely right for them in the playoffs to be a real contender. Now, I have another question for you, but I don't want to forget to just ask the simple question of your opinion of how many games the Vikings will end up winning. Like, how many do you think that they finish with?
Oh, man, if you were to ask me, I mean, well, we did kind of play this game a little bit after Kirk Cousins got hurt, right? And I think I had them with Dobbs starting the rest of the way. I think I had them getting to 8 wins, finishing 8-9, I think, if I remember. And I thought that was pretty generous because that was essentially putting Josh Dobbs as like a 500 quarterback the rest of the way. I think with the way they're playing, if they can keep this going, I think they can get to 9 or 10 wins. Now, the latter part of the season is going to get tough because you got Cincinnati and 2 games against Detroit, you know, in the last 4 weeks. But, you know, these next 3 games, Denver, Chicago, you got the bye week, and then you're at Las Vegas. You know, how much is that stretch, how much of the next couple of weeks are the Raiders going to come back to earth, so to speak? They've had two really, nice emotional wins to start out, things for Antonio Pierce. But on paper, I think at least you look at these next three games, these are all winnable games for the Vikings. And if they find a way to win like two out of those three, now you're talking they're what, 8-5, with 4 games to go. And now if you find a way to win, you got to think you pencil in that Packers game on New Year's Eve as a win. So then now you're at 9. And then maybe you split one of those Detroit games. You lose to Cincinnati, you split one of those Detroit games, and then maybe you find a way to get to 10 wins. But I think the way the schedule is playing out, provided everybody can, get healthy over the next few weeks, get as many guys back, you get Justin Jefferson back. I think if they keep things going the way it's been the last couple of weeks with Josh Dobbs, I can see them getting to 9, and maybe you split one of those tougher games down the stretch, and you get to 10 wins. And then I think that really puts you in a playoff spot pretty easily.
This is the hard thing to decide. Is now here's what's going to be funny if this doesn't go that way, is if Justin Jefferson returns and they lose some games, and then I get more tweets of like, they need to trade Jefferson. The offense didn't work the same without. That's
oh my God.
I've already gotten them. They won 5 in a row with Jefferson. Why did they need him? They should get draft picks. Your goal is to win the Super Bowl, not to just beat, Atlanta and New Orleans. The thing is that, Tim is questioning you calling them winnable games. It's, do not call Denver a terrible team right now. They were a terrible team. They're winning at halftime in Buffalo, which is very difficult. And Russell Wilson is playing well in these last few weeks. I know that I can't ask many people to pay close attention to the Denver Broncos' recent results, but our first impression of them was they were hilarious and a joke. And that's changed. Their defense has completely changed. They got rid of a few players, and they've turned a lot of things around. You also mentioned, the Raiders. You got to go to their place. Their defense is playing well. There's no guarantees for these next couple of games. They're definitely winnable. Okay, Chicago should be, but even Chicago kept it close with Kirk Cousins in the game. So to me, there's no just easy cruise. In fact, we'll see. I might end up being a Debbie Downer and kind of picking against them this week against Denver. They have a short week. That's going to be harder for them, but you're flying out to Denver. It's just going to be a little bit tricky. So we'll see. We'll see what that ends up looking like. 2 out of 3, I think, is a very reasonable expectation for that. All right. The last question I had for you is, clearly there's a 2017 comparison here. Now, this roster is not as talented as 2017. We just went through it. I stole the all-pro players off of that team, right? So it's not exactly the same. But during the midst of that season, Manny, Case Keenum became a real debate topic. Do you believe in Case Keenum? And you and I were in the middle of that, on the radio back then and everything. And I remember talking about how it wasn't sustainable. And ultimately, in Case Keenum's career, it was not sustainable.
Right.
But what I didn't do during that year was sort of enjoy the ride that a journeyman backup quarterback was having, because there were so many debates going on all the time. And that's part of our job, is to talk about the sports debates. In fact, it's a very high percentage of our job. And it's a very high percentage of me being a studier and lover of analytics and what they tell us, and looking at this guy's history and saying, I just don't think it can continue. With Josh Dobbs, there isn't much to suggest it can continue. Aside from making the case Kevin O'Connell when Jefferson returns, the offensive line, and his running ability. But looking at his priors, I mean, there's really nothing there. There's not a draft status. There's not previous games that he beat, the Cowboys this year, but there's not a whole lot of information that would suggest, this guy's just going to win week in and week out. Why does it feel different? If it feels different, it feels like this is not an argument that's going on. And for whatever reason, I feel differently watching it than I did then. about Keenum, where I was like, this is absurd. How does this keep happening? So why do I feel that way?
I think it feels different because, well, one, they are going to get Justin Jefferson back pretty soon, and I think that's only going to help Josh Dobbs going forward. At least for the rest of the season. And it just, I think it feels different because you have, with Case Keenum, and Case certainly had a lot more experience as a starter than Josh Dobbs has, right now. I mean, Case had started games for the Rams and the Texans and other places that he had been. So Case had a lot more experience and certainly a lot of experience as a starter in college too, with the Houston Cougars. But Case, I think with Case, Case was sort of, I think, riding this magic carpet ride, so to speak, of just like how great that defense was. And I think there was a little bit more, I guess, a bigger margin for error for Case to kind of just play like Brett Favre kind of reckless. And, Mike Zimmer hated it, obviously. But I think because that defense was so good and so reliable that, like Case could throw an interception and it was like it didn't really matter because like the defense was just going to stop the other team. Like it was just how it was going to be. I think with Dobbs, it feels a little bit more like, I think with Kevin O'Connell in place, there seems to be a little bit more of like trying to think of the word to describe it. It just feels a little bit different because Kevin O'Connell has a lot of control over the offense, so to speak, as the head coach. Mike Zimmer was a defensive guy, and that defense and that unit, that was his baby. And, in 2017, he kind of relied on, why am I having a blank on names today? Who's the offensive coordinator? It's the tip of the tongue.
Pat Shurmur.
Pat Shurmur, yes. Yeah, and he's on Deion's staff right now. I don't know why I'm having such a blank today. But Zimmer kind of relied on Pat Shurmur to kind of just run that offense because he trusted him. And, he would go up and rip Case after games and stuff and that sort of thing. But, Case could take it and he just ran with it. Kevin O'Connell is the head coach, and being an offensive guy just seems like he has his fingerprints are all over this offense, even though he has Josh Dobbs, a completely different quarterback than what he had from the start. And so I feel like with Kevin O'Connell being in control of the offense, I trust that this is going to continue. I just have a feeling like this is going to continue, and Josh Dobbs is going to continue to play well because the head coach has such a significant influence on what they're doing offensively. And the fact that Dobbs just has that ability to escape and make plays, if something is off or something goes wrong, the protection breaks down. He has the ability. I mean, the one where he rolled out and, escaped a sack and then kind of flipped it over and hit TJ Hawkinson for like a 15-yard pass was just like, I saw that and I was like, oh my God, like that. Haven't seen a Viking quarterback do that in years. You know what I mean? And then the touchdown run he had where he ran the other way and got to the edge and got into the end zone. I was just like, man, it just felt different, man. It just feels really, really different. I'm not saying they're going to go to the NFC title game like they did with Case Keenum, but it just feels like they could get to the playoffs, and it feels like they're going to get to the playoffs and they're going to be a very tough out. Even if they don't end up winning a game, that wild card game is going to be really tight and highly contested, and they're going to have a shot in the end, and maybe they just come up short. But I don't think this is a fluke, man. I've seen enough now, especially that first half yesterday. I've seen enough to make me think that this is something that could really continue. I'm buying it.
I wanted to answer this question real quick. The Vikings beat the 49ers. How can you put them behind a team that they beat? Let me just toss this out there. Kirk Cousins was the quarterback when you beat them. I mean, that's kind of a big difference. I know Dobbs is playing well, but that was a great game from Kirk Cousins. And without Deebo Samuel, Trent Williams, those are pretty amazing football players, like probably two of the best three players they have. So that, those things, they play into it. Also, look, let's do it this way. Vegas, not even my opinion, not even your opinion. what would be the line if they played today on a neutral field, Vikings 49ers favored by like what? More 3.5, 4? I
Three
mean,
or four, yeah, probably.
yeah, I mean, it would be leaning toward the 49ers. So yeah, that's kind of a big part of it, not having your starting quarterback who was
Yeah,
playing like great football. But anyway, let me just get back to what you were saying, because I
yeah,
think all your explanations were great. Uh, the one thing that I think really stands out, first of all, the first impression of Case Keenum was not good. He didn't play well against Pittsburgh. He didn't play well. So he had that crazy game against the Bucks, but then he didn't play well against Detroit, and they lost 14-7. They lost, Dalvin Cook, and then they won a game where they injured Aaron Rodgers that maybe they wouldn't have won because they weren't that good on offense that day. And I remember his numbers through like 6 starts were just like, okay, this looks like a backup quarterback. So that's a different first impression from Dobbs, where the guy has a comeback game-winning drive and then plays freaking amazing, like right away. The physical talent can't be ignored. Case Keenum was undersized, did not have a big arm, and a lot of the plays that happened were just floating little balloons that just came down in the hands of Diggs and Thielen. And that's what Zimmer kept bringing up. It's like, yeah, he's making these crazy throws and we're catching them, but you can't keep doing that. Dobbs has not been making crazy throws. He's been throwing to open wide receivers on time. It looks a little bit different from just, hey, these random throws up in the air are landing in people's hands. I think there's 2 other factors. One is in 2017, the Vikings had built under Zimmer and Spielman over multiple years to compete for a Super Bowl. And that was the standard. So we were also viewing it through the lens of, can you really win anything with this guy? And eventually he proved that, like, yeah, you could win a playoff game against the Saints. It took a miracle, but you could. But he also threw a pick in that game that should have lost them the game, that
yeah,
Mike Zimmer had nightmares about. So you can see why it would be different. But that's another part of it too, is the standard for that team was, you are so good, you need to go deep in the playoffs or this season is a waste. And that changed how we felt. It wasn't like, oh, this is fun, like everybody's having a good time. It was like, no, you got to win, because that's where we are in the timeline right now. The Vikings are in a different place in the timeline. Everything's kind of fun and interesting. It's like Ivan Pace. Okay. Caleb Evans had a 83 PFF grade yesterday. Like, look at this thing that's happening. And Andrew Booth Jr. played, I think, 22 snaps and was on the plus side as well. So you got all these players who are on the younger side, and you got fairly new coach still who we're still learning about. Brian Flores has been this like exciting, the guy who's been brought in that has done defense differently than we've seen done before. There's a lot to like look at. There's a lot of shiny things to look at. Be like, oh, look over there, look at this. And that's changed the vibe, because we never had the expectation of this team's really going to compete for a Super Bowl. Then they went 0-3, and then our expectation was they were going to tank and be terrible. And so it's like, oh, wow, this happened, this crazy thing. And if Dobbs doesn't keep going, it's not like they wasted the number 1 defense. They grew a lot. They learned a lot. They found out a lot about themselves, and they found that their timeline can actually be a little quicker than maybe we thought it was going to be going into next year, even if it falls off the face of the earth. If Keenum had fallen off the face of the earth, it would have been like, oh my God, they just wasted the number 1 defense. And
yeah,
Zimmer just went from 15, 16, 17, these amazing defenses, and did nothing with them. And so there was more of an urgency. But I also think, Manny, at the end of the day, it comes back to the guy in charge. When the guy in charge, and everybody takes their cues from him, including the fans. And if the guy in charge is like, this is awesome, love this guy, I'm having so much fun coaching him, this is great, everybody get behind this, versus the coach coming out and repeatedly saying, it's just getting lucky, guys, he's no Teddy. You're like, and at times it was uncomfortable. And
yeah.
Zimmer would give him a weird compliment, like saying he had big balls, which I think it's after 9, so it gets weird on the show. But like, dude, what? Like, you're saying this in public? It was just bizarre, right? So I think that everybody's taken their cues from the coach. They've sort of said, we didn't really expect to be here anyway, so off we go, and the expectations are different. I think that's why it feels different. It also feels like this guy has the physical talent to keep doing it and potentially be interesting for the future. But we will see. Do you agree with all that? That was a lot.
Yeah, I mean, like you know how I feel about Josh Dobbs. I mean, I was skeptical of the move, just wondering like how much of a difference was it going to make to save the season. And now I'm, just as a Vols fan, like I love to see this. I love that it's at least so far the last couple of weeks, it's been a really cool story. So I'm with it. I'm behind them. I hope it continues. I hope they run the table the rest of the way. Not likely, but this is fun, man. I'm enjoying it. This is a lot more fun than it was when they were 0-3 or 1-4, and you're just like, this thing is over. Let's trade everybody and look to 2024. So I'm just going to enjoy this and just see how it turns out. I'm excited.
Oh, I'm also I'm glad for everybody who watches, because look, everybody knows the stance on tanking, and I'm not trying to I know that Carolina looks bad. We'll see where that goes over the next few years. They need a lot. Houston probably doesn't regret playing Davis Mills all last year and ending up with CJ Stroud at the top of the draft. So yeah. By the numbers, had you taken 1-4 and made it 2-15 and potentially drafted Drake May, who I think is amazing after watching him the other day and throughout the season, your chances for being a great team in the future probably a little bit higher than they are right now. At the same time, the way that this has come together has told us so much about Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores and what they have for the future. I'm sorry, you're right, Scott. I forgot to mention Mekhi Blackmon has been playing well as well.
Yeah.
That it's hard to give back, right? It's hard to say like, oh, I would give this all back. I would give back the development of all these players, including Jordan Addison and Kevin O'Connell being a really good head coach. I would just give it all back to draft high. Like, that's hard to do. That's an interesting trade. That's probably maybe that's Thursday's discussion, because we've gone longer than usual and I want to get back to the game here. But it's this suddenly just is fascinating and energetic, and I see it in the numbers and I see it in the comments, and I see like everybody being sort of given new life by what's going on here. And that is different from before. That is another part of this, why I think Dobbs is being met with less skepticism and more like, let's see what happens, baby, because the world is wide open at the quarterback position. It felt like a little bit dark in 17, that because of Teddy, that the position was wide open. Now it feels exciting. So there is a different vibes in a lot of ways. Manny, you are the best, and I appreciate it. You did to Purple Purgatory. No, the headline is not clickbait. Anthony Barr plays for the Vikings again. That happened. That's what I figured that might happen if people logged in late and like hadn't been looking at the news, and they'd be like, "Are you guys messing around? Is this like head?" No, that actually did happen. So
and we talked about it.
Yeah,
and we did talk about
the first like 25 minutes. We covered it. So anyway, but you're the best. I appreciate you, Manny. Thursday night back here, 8:00, and we've got a big game to talk about and lots of potential options for top Broncos of our lifetime. So we will see you all then. Football